Then can you hear me okay?
Huh? You look pixelated. I can't. Now you're coming in clear.
Yeah,
You're
makeup.
you were looking pixelated for a minute there. Hold on for a second. Let me turn this fan off. This light that I have makes me hot.
Hello. I'm good. How are
Hello.
you?
How are you?
That's
Good.
Dr. Loa here. Is he on already or no?
Can you see him? He is, but I don't know. Lo, can you hear us? Can you see us? He looks like he's in a different space, so I don't
Yeah.
know
I
if something's
don't
going
see
on with
him.
his internet.
Mm.
He's on here, but he's stuck, so he might have to log out, log
Yeah.
back in. So we have time. We're on here early.
I'm good.
How are you doing?
My birthday's this week, so yeah.
Oh my gosh, you and
Yeah. Yeah.
your
Everything
brother's
else is on
birthday are right behind
Sunday.
each other.
Yeah. So yeah.
Wow, you guys should have been friends.
How are you doing today?
Good, good. Enjoying the weather. It's been like
Mm.
raining here and cold.
It's nice outside today. Like we got
Uh,
a break. This is the first week we have not had any rain in I'm saying at least 2 months. Yeah.
really? Okay. Um, Thanks for joining. Please let everyone know we're going to be talking about PTSD today, so we're going to have a lot to cover. So whoever you think may benefit, ask them to jump on as well. We're going to give it a few more minutes. It's 7 o'clock. We'll give it like 5 more minutes for people to jump on. We have a lot to cover, so I imagine we're going to have to break it down into parts like we did anxiety. So let me see if Lowell, let me see, is he going to be able to jump back on? Let me see. I'm texting him to see if he's able to jump back on.
Yeah, someone I jumped on, but then he went away.
He said he's
Okay.
trying to get back on. Hi, Chris. How are you doing? Um, Let everyone know that we are on here because we're going to be talking about PTSD today. So we're going to have a lot to cover today.
There he is.
Okay, cool. I
Up
see
in
you.
the
Are you in a
mountains.
different location?
Well, I have an
Oh,
HDMI
that explains
connection.
it.
I've got a pretty good connection.
What
Mm-hmm.
what mountains are you in?
I'm in the Rockies.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
I know that is nice. Um, Oh, we have another. I'll tell you guys this before we get started. We got about 2 more minutes before we get started. We have a new addition to the Men Suffer Too, and he is amazing. He's an author, and he has an amazing story. And he's going to come on here as a guest, maybe after we do the PTSD series, to talk about his story and talk about, how he's been impacted by mental health. And his book is amazing. It's called Limitless. So I can't wait till he gets to share his story, but he's going to be a part of Men Suffer Too as well.
Yeah. His HDMI is not working the way it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, was he gone again? Hey, everyone. We're just giving it a couple more minutes till 7:05 to let people join the room. We're going to be talking about PTSD tonight, and I imagine we're going to add more parts to it because there's so much to cover. PTSD is a heavy subject. So we're going to try to cover as much as we can today, and then we'll add, I'm sure we're going to need to, like we did anxiety, add a part 2 and 3 and talking about, because you're talking about PTSD, I'm looking to define it today and talk about the basics, and then maybe part 2 we can get into like different populations and things of that sort. Dr. Lowell was talking about PTSD as it relates to athletes. As you guys know, his background is he works with elite athletes in the NFL and other places. So other forms. Oh, 1 second. Okay. Okay. So you okay? Okay, cool. So let's get started because this is like I said, this is going to be a lot of information to cover. My name is Dr. Leslie Rogers. You have Dr. Lowell Whiteman here, and you have Wayne Lassane here. We all are here to spread awareness around mental health in different areas. We've already talked about anxiety, and we've talked about other things along the way. So tonight we're going to talk about PTSD, and PTSD is kind of a heavy subject where you can get into a lot of discussion. So tonight what I hope to do is define PTSD and then have a discussion as to experiences and things of that sort. And Dr. Whiteman, I know you want to talk about specifically PTSD in athletes. I'm sure because of the information we have, we might have to add a part 2 and part 3 to talk about different areas of PTSD, especially if there's questions and things of that sort. But I definitely want to define it tonight and talk about it a little bit. So, so let's go over a little admin. So when we talk about PTSD is trauma events, and I'll get into that in a minute, but tonight we're not going to talk about sexual trauma. There's too many triggers there and buzzwords that I don't want to really cover online. So I want to kind of stay away from that. I do recognize that that is an issue and it's prevalent, but it's a hard issue, and we're online, and I want to allow people to have time to leave and process and things of that sort, and we just can't do that in this platform. So we're just going to talk about the basics around any mental disorder that we talk about, right? We're just talking about the basics just to spread awareness. So let's talk about PTSD. So so PTSD was originally noted in the DSM, Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what we use to diagnose. And it was together with anxiety disorders. But in 2013, August of 2013, they got together and they split it up into its own category. So now it's separated and it's called trauma and stressor related disorders. And then you have trauma disorders clumped together in the DSM-5. So PTSD was originally thought to impact military personnel, but now it's been expanded to impact so many other people, right? Adults, adolescents, and children over 6. Now they do have criteria as well for children under 6, but then there's specific things. Remember, I think we talked about with anxiety, kids present differently, right? So with PTSD, you may look for different symptoms as you would with an adult. So let's get into the criteria of what PTSD is, and then we'll go into discussion. So there's themes to PTSD, guys. Is exposure, you have intrusive thoughts, you have avoidance, negative alterations in thoughts and mood, alterations in arousal, and then other criteria too. So we're just going to really define that really quickly. So PTSD, you have to have been directly experiencing a traumatic event, being physically, and this is an example, being physically attacked by someone or a car accident. So you yourself would have had to have experienced a traumatic incident, right? You yourself would have had to have witnessed in person the event as it occurred to others. Like you witness an event, like you witness a murder of someone else, right? Learning that the event occurred to a family member or a close friend, the event must have been violent or accidental. Repeated or extreme exposure to reverse or details of a traumatic event. And an example I gave was first responders collecting human remains, right? Repeated extreme exposure. Police officers repeatedly exposed to child abuse cases. So guys, this does not apply to exposure to electronic media, TV, movies, or pictures unless you work in the field. And I give an example of that. When I was working at the FBI, those of you know, I was with the FBI for 25 years doing investigations and as an intelligence analyst. And after 9/11, I had to watch beheading videos. And it was very traumatic for me, having to watch those videos to do my job. So that would apply to the criteria under PTSD because I worked in that field, right? But it's not for someone that just turned on the TV, because there's a lot of stuff on TV that you look at can be considered, I think could be considered traumatic, right? By looking at the news and things of that sort. But that's not what they're talking about in the DSM. You have to have worked in the field. And that is exposure, being exposed to a traumatic event. Then you have the intrusive thoughts. And all of this has to be a month. It has to take place a month after the event has taken place. I'm sorry. I see you guys coming in, guys. I might can't acknowledge you, but I see you guys coming in. So intrusive thoughts is recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive, distressing memories of a traumatic event. Children under 6, again, they might have repetitive play that may occur in which themes or aspects of the event are expressed. So with adults, it's distressing memories, but in children, they might have repetitive play. They might play with themes, and the themes might be of the event. Recurrent distressing dreams, where the content is related to the event. And children, again, under 6, the dreams, it might be frightening dreams without recognizing its content. Kids might have dreams, but they can't really verbalize what the dream is about under 6 years old, right? I worked with a child with trauma before, and they said a monster was standing next to my bed, right? As opposed to if an adult had an intrusive dream, they might remember the person or the event or whoever was involved with the event. Intense, prolonged psychological distress of exposure to external or external cues. These are just triggers. We talked a lot about triggers when we had anxiety, when we talked about anxiety, right? That symbolize or resemble an aspect of a traumatic event. Prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues, which are triggers. Physiological reactions to external or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. So these, again, are triggers. You have your physiological triggers, right? You have your cognitive triggers. Remember all those triggers? And you guys can go back to the videos that we talked about anxiety, because we did talk about triggers and anxiety more in depth. Then you have the avoidance component. Now, avoidance is huge in PTSD. People with PTSD have high avoidant behaviors, which means that avoidance or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about closely associated with the traumatic event. Avoidance are efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with a traumatic event. You try to avoid the thoughts, any memories of it. You try to just brush out your head and avoid it. Some people, like for instance, may pull extra hours at work because that takes their mind. A lot of people with PTSD don't like to be alone because when you're alone, guess what? That's the perfect time for those distraught thoughts to come up, right? Avoidance are efforts to avoid external reminders. People, places, conversations, activities, objects, situations. Persons avoid shopping for groceries during early hours and only go to grocery stores at closing to avoid large crowds, right? So avoidance is like a huge key in PTSD, guys. Negative alterations in cognitions, mood, the way we think and the way we feel. Beginning or worsening after the event has occurred, inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event, persistent or exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, others, or the world, like I am bad, no one can be trusted, the world is completely dangerous. After you've experienced a traumatic event, you're in a car accident and now you think that I can never drive again because the roads are unsafe, right? Persistent negative emotional state, fear, anger, guilt, shame. A lot of people with PTSD, especially military trauma, have a lot of anger disturbances, fear, guilt, shame, diminished interest and participation in significant activities, feeling detached or estranged from others, persistent inability to experience positive emotions, happiness, satisfaction, or loving feelings. Then you have alterations in arousal, again, such as hypervigilance. People with PTSD are, some of them are hypervigilant depending on what the traumatic event was. A lot of trauma victims are hypervigilant, right? Their hypersenses are up, like they're hyper aware of their surroundings, right? Exaggerated startle response. You hear, when I was working for the VA, veterans would often they hear loud boom, they have a startle response, right? Problems concentrating, sleep disturbances, because your mind constantly races, right? So you have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. Duration, again, is more than 1 month. Less than a month is something called acute stress disorder. If the symptoms are more than a month after the event has taken place, then you have a diagnosis of PTSD if you meet the criteria. Disturbances causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Disturbance is not attributable to a physiological effects or substance such as medication, alcohol, or other medical condition. And there are specifiers, guys, such as depersonalization and derealization. Sometimes people with, especially sexual trauma, they will have experiences of derealization or depersonalization, persistent or recurrent experiences of feeling detached as if one is looking at yourself from the outside. A lot of times I used to hear, it feels like I'm looking at myself from the outside. I'm standing outside of my body looking at myself, right? So I wanted to define that first because, and I know that's a lot, right? And that was pretty quickly. But the gist is a person experiences a traumatic event that causes significant symptoms a month after. And symptoms, again, you have your exposure, you have your intrusive thoughts, your avoidance, negative alterations in thinking and mood, alterations in arousal, that hypervigilance, and then you have your specifiers. So I want to go over research and then we can get into discussion because I think we're going to talk about differential diagnoses later. So research, guys, although different groups have different levels of exposure to traumatic events, the conditional probability of developing PTSD following a similar level of exposure may also vary across different cultural groups. So I've said this before, when people have symptoms, you can have the exact same event happen to you, but everybody's symptoms may be different. The way everyone responds may be different. I may have the same experience, the same traumatic event as one of you. I may not have symptoms that qualify me for PTSD. I may be able to, gradually overcome the traumatic event, right? So everybody's symptoms are different. Nobody's are the same. They may be similar. Rates of PTSD are higher among veterans and others whose vocation increases the risk of traumatic exposure, such as police, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and on suicide. Traumatic events such as childhood abuse, increased risk for suicide. PTSD is also associated with suicidal ideations and suicide attempts, and presence of the disorder may indicate which individuals with ideation eventually make a suicide plan or actually attempt suicide. And I will say people with PTSD are often diagnosed with another mental health disorder as well, such as ADHD, anxiety, bipolar, depression, and substance use. Substance use is high in PTSD diagnosed persons, right? Especially in the military and law enforcement, substance abuse is really high. And if you think about it, when we went over those symptoms just now, if you think about the symptoms of depression and anxiety, they overlap a little bit, right? So then you work to rule out, if it's PTSD, is there most oftentimes there's depression and anxiety as well, right? That, especially a lot of people with PTSD feels vulnerable and feel hopeless, helpless against their symptoms. So then it oftentimes lead to depressive feelings, like the helplessness. And that's where the suicide comes in, because I can't control these symptoms. I can't get rid of these symptoms. They're too overwhelming. I don't have my life anymore. I can't go out anymore. I'm afraid to go out because I'm afraid of danger. Something bad is going to happen and things of that sort. Yeah, and I've seen that a lot in by working in the VA. So we can go into discussion now, and then we'll get into, if we have enough time, we'll get into different therapies. But I honestly think that's going to be another part to this, to get into therapies and things of that sort. But we'll see how it goes. So let's start the discussion on PTSD.
So, real quick, I just wanted to say, again, I appreciate this platforms you created, because for a couple of reasons. Just for the fact that you acknowledge that, we talk about sexual trauma and you didn't want to be triggering to people and stuff like that, because we probably don't have the time to really get into helping them or whatever. But I think that's where a lot of platforms fall short, because like I have a huge issue with a lot of the talk shows, because they have these people come on there, they open up wounds, and then they don't really, these people pour their heart in there, and then they just left to go off on their own, and then they got to deal with that, and then somebody opened up. So I just wanted to speak to that, and I really appreciate it. Also, I think that you and Dr. Lowe, y'all have deeper understanding of PTSD, and you guys are here to really help people out, and I'm here to kind of I feel like, just kind of bring it to the layman's terms, and just give association to people, to help. For instance, I thought it was great last week when you talked about people who go through basic training, are in real-time war situations. And so what made me think about, what I thought about, was that a lot of people don't even know that they're probably even dealing with PTSD. They don't even realize or understand that they have it, because it took me as I got older to realize how the military affected my sleep patterns, and how I show up, and how I interact with people sometimes, and how I view the world, and all these type of things. And then even more so when you were talking about the descriptions to PTSD, and you were talking about drug use, and you were talking about depression and anxiety, all these type of things. What came to my mind is, again, people not knowing that they are dealing with PTSD, because what I heard was a lot of people who live in inner cities and poor communities deal with PTSD on a regular basis, and just don't even know that's what they're dealing with, because again, they live in these harsh communities, these harsh situations, and not understand why they show up in the world the way they do. So I just wanted to bring some awareness and acknowledgement to that. I think that sometimes people may not even know they're dealing with PTSD, who clearly have PTSD.
Yeah. And there's also generational traumas too, when you talk about the traumas of growing up in certain environments and things of that sort. And, let's go back for a second to military. You're absolutely right. A lot of folks don't know, what the symptoms of PTSD is. They just know that they're struggling. And a lot of times when I was working with veterans, the first thing they would say is, well, Dr. Rogers, I've never been to combat. And I would say, well, did you go through training? And they would say, yeah. And I would say, well, tell me what training involved. And oh my goodness, what they went through in training, that was the real stuff, right? It was just like you were in combat, right? It's a simulation of what combat is, right? And then,
Well,
believe it or not, and I know Wayne, and Dr. Lowell, you might know too, people are being accidentally killed in training,
Yeah.
right? So it's a simulation,
well, and
like
Leslie,
real world training.
well, Leslie,
Go
you're
ahead,
being
Dr.
kind
Lowell.
by using the word. You're being kind by saying assimilating, because it's. I've been around those environments, and it's real ammo sometimes. It sometimes gets used in the wrong direction. It's real explosives, and oftentimes there's responses by the recruits literally in the trenches, across wire, underwater, all this different stuff, that they get a little bit fearful, and they don't pay attention to the boundaries of the live rounds, and that's where they have a fatal event. Or there's somebody that they didn't vet well enough when they put them on an obstacle course, and they fall from a 20-foot rope ladder that they're trying to get over, and they break a back. And so it assimilation is being kind in
That might
in
not be
reality.
right. That might not be the right term. It might not. So in my mind, as a civilian, it's a simulated event. But you guys know better than I do, when you get in there, it's not. I guess on a spectrum, maybe some of it is supposed to be simulated, but then on the other hand, is real world. Real world. I
Well,
guess what would be a better word for that? You're
I
in
don't
an
think we should.
actual
Yeah,
environment where.
it's reality-based simulations, and I
Okay.
think that's a combination of the two. Because
Yeah.
I don't want to cheat the military and their efforts to really save lives. Because yes, there have been accidents, lives have been lost in
Mm-hmm.
training, but that one life that's lost probably saved 10 or more, and that's an arbitrary number on my part. But the military analysts know what importance there is to the training. But those are trauma events. Like Wayne said, we have neighborhoods that have trauma in them, and they're high percentage areas of that create trauma. It's not just in the military. I mean, there are some kids that have trauma just going to school because of the conditions of the neighborhoods. You have kids that have phobias that moms and dads don't even realize that the term phobia is the precursor to an anxious or traumatic event. And in the definition of PTSD, you can have symptoms being aroused 3 months or more before the symptoms actually show
Yeah.
that you have a persistent problem. Because remember, that 1 month number we talked about was the persistence of the symptoms. But we can have symptoms up to 3 months post trauma before we even know that they're in PTSD.
Yeah.
To Wayne's point, there are a lot of people are walking around having PTSD symptoms and don't know it. And that goes back to what we talked about last week and the weeks before about the awareness of our communities and our environments to what are the precursors to anxious moments, precursors to traumatic events. For me, for example, in the sports world, trauma is a daily occurrence almost in any sport. Now, that's a pretty aggressive word, trauma. In sports, we don't use the word trauma. We use the word, let's go do the drill. Let's have an exercise. Let's go practice our X's and O's, the ones against the ones and the ones against the twos. And those are not camouflage. They're not on purpose. It's just the way they process trying to get to a winning situation. But in its simplest forms, everybody, sports at any level, the trauma begins with acknowledging you have failure and error, and it reflects on the scoreboard in wins and losses. That's the beginning of cognitive awareness that I have been traumatized. I didn't do my job. I don't feel like I get contributed. Those are all the things we've just talked about. as it relates to defining PTSD, but those are real feelings in competitive environments, whether it's in sports, business, or just life at home. That's where the sensitivity of moms and dads, coaches and bosses need to be aware about, okay, how is my environment creating the possibility of symptomatic traumatic events?
Yeah.
And we're not doing it. We're just not doing it.
Yeah. Well, what you talked about, where symptoms can occur like up to 3 months later, they have this, and I didn't mention that earlier, called delayed onset.
Yeah.
You have delayed onset PTSD. And also, I have diagnosed where people have gone through adulthood and have had PTSD, wasn't diagnosed in childhood. Now go through and add a diagnosis and say childhood onset, which means that there was trauma as a child and it was never dealt with as a child. Now the symptoms are becoming more apparent as an adult, and that's what we're working on, to process through the symptoms as an adult. So childhood onset. So you have delayed onset, and then you can even put childhood onset on this there as well. Absolutely.
No, I was going to say,
were
we
going to
use
say
some of the
something,
similar
Wayne?
words in the military as far as drills and exercises. We use the same words. We going out to shoot targets and blow up things, and we use it. Yeah, same vocabulary.
Yeah. So we're talking about men, mental health talk as it pertains to men's mental health. So let's do that connection between PTSD and men, and we talk about those negative cognitions, negative behaviors. So with you two being a man, how does it potentially impact men by having this sense of loss of control? Because PTSD, I often say, strips you of your control, right? To be a man in your mind, right? In your mind, it potentially strips you of the power and control to do the things that you think that you either could have done before the traumatic event or you used to do before the traumatic event. Now everything has changed. Your worldview of the world before the traumatic event has happened has changed. The way you deal with things has changed. Your behaviors have changed. Your thoughts have changed. Your emotions have changed. Everything has changed, right? So as a man that now feels that you have no sense of control after this event has occurred, wherever that event has, and how does that potentially
I'll start by
impact
saying
you?
that I definitely, one way in the world that we live in, and understand how you're supposed to show up in the world as a man, it automatically goes back to now you're feeling like you're weak, like you're less than, because again, now you don't have that control, right? So now obviously you're not, like something must be wrong with you at this point now, because you can't do the thing that you need to do, or you're not good enough to do the thing that you need to do. So now it's just, and that weakness, now affects so many other things in life, right? Now it affects your confidence, your ability to go out and do the things that you on a daily basis that you have to do in order to survive or get through life or whatever, right? It affects your relationships with others, right? Because now you can't show up in those relationships because now you are dealing with this confidence issue and this woe is me issue, and or this self negative talk about self, right? So and also I'm sure it affects you and how, as I just stated, how you show up for yourself. So now all these things combined makes you wake up damn near not want to wake up on a daily basis, right? It makes you not want to get out into the world, makes you want to stay secluded and become a recluse and kind of stay to self, because you don't want to deal with anybody because of all the things that you're feeling and that you don't feel like you can show up in the world. So yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Wayne. We have a socialized definition of masculine behavior that we many times as men at a young age, we're not responsible for creating it for us. It's like the stronger, more prevalent emotion of hate. It's not something you're born with. It's something you're taught. The same thing with masculinity. We are taught what the structure of masculinity is, and it's been a bit off course as it relates to interacting with our managing trauma, managing change in our world and our life. So I agree wholeheartedly with the points you made about, when things don't go right, I feel less than who I am because it measures up to what the definition of manhood is. I didn't make it. I didn't live up to it. And then there's this free vocabulary and conversation amongst men in our own groups about picking on each other. I'm going to throw it down with you. That's how others try to get their masculinity back, by pulling down others in their group. And it's just real. I mean, movies have been made of, the sharks and I forgot the sharks with the Hispanic versus the white gang. The movie, a musical is made out of that. There's so many theatrical and artistic examples of how we've not done ourselves justice in being real men who are humble, who have high integrity, who are willing to and able to cry when it's necessary to show their feelings. So we've got to make a change in the way we look at men, not therapeutically, but more in the conversations we have amongst each other. One of my colleagues here in Denver is a big advocate for masculine African American mindset. And he says one of the things that I grew up with was how I was approaching women. I was told as a man that I could go out and do whatever I wanted with whatever women that were willing to do it with me. And that was my definition of my interaction with women as a man. And then I realized I wanted to have kids, and I was wondering why I wasn't finding that one person. Well, it's because his reputation in the community was perpetuating this image of masculinity. And he then had his own set of trauma with that realization. He was being ostracized, and he didn't even know it, because his guys were telling him he's doing the right thing. And yet the community was pushing back away from him and saying, you're not going to go where you think you're going to go. It's not going to work. You're not going to find the female that you're going to want to have children with. Now, thankfully, he's now the father of one with one more on the way. So he found it. He made the change and felt through the trauma of being singled out and not hearing, for so many years, not hearing what was being said in actions more than words. And, so I felt bad for him. I said, let's try to change, make a difference with all men, not just men of color, but all men, and handle each set of social mores that bring us down and create the social trauma that we don't need to feel anymore. In fact, for me, social trauma is one of the easiest ones to take a shot at and really make a difference with men, is really working with that. And then that has, if it's not worked with, it has a direct impact on PTSD, because I've got athletes that will go out and do physical things, physical trauma to their body because of an emotional, maybe it was an anxiety that creeped up, but then it becomes a post-traumatic situation. It goes to a clinical state because of it. So I've mentioned this before. I believe that I've had an athlete who was a cutter. And he hid it for a lot of seasons because he knew that he was going to get a lot of pushback, or even men laughing at him about it, because he had seen it in high school when kids laughed at other kids. Words have power, and they can create.
And this is why I stress so much about just community and surrounding yourself with people who are caring and understanding and can help possibly even recognize some of those symptoms or things when things come up, and can be there for you to help you know that it's okay, and that what do you need from me, or you could talk to me, and I just think that we don't have enough around us like that, because we surround ourselves with, back to what you were talking about, Dr. Lowe's, that social construct that that whole making fun of or and trying to antagonize somebody because you feel like they're weaker than you or whatever, and it's tough, and I understand like that it can be tough, especially if you don't even know what those people look like around you who can help you out, who do have those that ability to have that capacity for you to show up and be there for you. So I completely understand it.
It's a cycle we've got to break, and if we do, we're going to have some major changes in our approach to preventative versus the emergency situation. I don't know anybody out there that wants to keep hurting. I would like to be preventative and really get after it and change the paradigm of thinking.
Yeah, but it's a diversion. If you think about bullies, for instance, right? A bully bully someone, I believe, because it's a diversion, to divert off of what they're feeling, what they've gone through, right? When you talk about emotions and what you're going through, again, we just talked about avoidance. It's a way to avoid, it's a way to keep safe. So when you have PTSD and when you have other traumas and when you go through certain things in your life, you develop safety behaviors, behaviors that keep you safe. I believe bullying is a form of a safety behavior, right? If you're not bullied, then maybe you will become the bully, right? And then it's that vulnerability piece, right?
Yeah.
Not wanting people to see who you really are, right? Wayne, you brought up, and I wrote this down, as a male, as a man, feeling less than weakness, vulnerability, low confidence, and low self-esteem. That's huge for men, right? If your low confidence and low self-esteem is low, then what do you have as a man, right? And then I wrote down change your self mindset, being able to become self-aware enough to change what you feel about yourself. And I say this a lot. Oftentimes, what we feel about ourselves, we tend to project onto others and think that they're going to feel that way about us, right? But they really don't. The biggest thing is it's what we feel about ourselves. So then we become uncomfortable with showing up in front of people, and we avoid because we don't want people to see what we see, right? You look at her, you see what you see. You see this person with no confidence, that don't, have a lack of self-love, no longer understand yourself. Again, that vulnerability piece. And when you go back to PTSD under the negative alterations in cognitive mood, negative alterations in cognition and mood, the I'm a bad person, no one can be trusted, no one loves me. We develop these distorted ideations. If you think about it, our mind comes up with this way to rationalize about a situation, to rationalize about a traumatic event. And when we try to rationalize about it, we come up with thoughts that may not be validated, that they're irrational, right? It doesn't make sense, right? But it's our way of filling in the pieces of to what happened. It was my fault. It was my fault that, from a military standpoint, it was my fault that I led my team into an ambush. It was my fault. I should have known the ambush was there. That's the mind trying to rationalize about the situation. But then when you restructure that, what exactly is an ambush? You're not supposed to know it's there, right? You're not, if you knew it was there, then the other side wouldn't have been doing their job, right? So, to kind of process through these irrational thoughts and really think clearly, because during a traumatic event, you're not in a position to really think clearly. You're trying to make sense of the world as to what took place.
In your example, Leslie, I would hope that the sergeant major was there to say, hey, gentlemen, it's an ambush, for crying out loud. We're not supposed to know it's there. But that doesn't always happen. To stay with the serious point you're making.
Low, that's a real example.
No,
yeah.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
As is the example that the good sergeant major that knows about the fact checks it all out and says, look, stop here. Don't be disrespecting your teammates here, because that may kill you. That disrespectful moment could kill you. So let's make sure we understand that this is an ambush. Now, the other side of your point is that in fact happens. But the traumatic event does not get acknowledged, does not get reinforced in a proper way, so that we can move on and be productive,
right?
Not diminish the character of others.
Now think about how those thoughts are then reinforced. So now you think you assume the blame and the guilt from not being able to save your person from an ambush. So when you come back home in the real world, now it's extended to your family. I couldn't keep my team safe. I couldn't keep my comrades safe. I couldn't keep soldiers safe. So now I can't keep my family safe. And now I can't keep myself safe.
And that's where you come back to your reality statement. The facts is it was an ambush. Yes, let's acknowledge your feelings. Let's make sure you understand that those feelings are real, so that you can then understand that avoidance is not the way to handle those real feelings. the way to handle them is to bring them into the light, know that you've got a support group around you, whether it be family, friends, colleagues in the team, colleagues in the community, colleagues in the barracks, wherever it may be. But those colleagues also need to have a sense of understanding of how to say the things we've just said, that they realize the facts, share the facts, along with that empathy, that sensitivity. Because too often I've had military folks that they didn't know where the support was. They got the message that, hey, an ambush is an ambush. Okay, you can't manage that. Yes, your friend was lost, and you can have real feelings about that. But here I am to literally hold you. Here I am, and where are the other people when you have, God forbid, but they have a triggering event and go back into it, and I'm not around? Where are those other support people in your world that you can call upon and help you work through that realization again of the trauma?
Yeah.
Because it happens.
Yeah. So, the important piece here, and if anyone on here wants to ask any questions, please do before we log off. So the important thing here is there is support, and sometimes trauma, you can't handle it alone. Sometimes it's too much, right? A lot of times I hear men say, and again, I'm saying men because that's what we're talking about, awareness of health right now. A lot of times I hear men say, I can do it on my own. I don't need to be here in therapy, right? But something had you come, right? If you thought that you could do it alone, you wouldn't have engaged with me in the first place. So something pushed you to come. Even if you say, well, my wife told me I better come, or somebody else told me to come. You have an autonomous decision-making tool, right? You can make your own decisions, right? Something made you come. So that's that interest and that curiosity about, can I get help, right? And there is help. There is help. There is therapies out there. There's evidence-based therapies. I'm certified, VA certified in cognitive processing therapy, which I love. I'm about to do a cognitive processing therapy group for men. But cognitive processing therapy helps you to challenge those thoughts that you developed after a traumatic event, and the mood, and helps to improve mood by creating evidence around the events, evidence to dispute events, right? Cognitive processing therapy, and it's a wonderful therapy because it does help. You have prolonged exposure therapy, where the idea is the more and more you're exposed through therapeutic intervention, the more you'll be desensitized to it. You have eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR, which is a great tool. There was some a bit of challenges behind whether that was an evidence-based psychotherapy or not. VA uses it a lot. A lot of places use it. I love it. I wanted to get certified, but I left the VA before I could get certified in EMDR. So if I put a therapy on a spectrum from intrusive to less intrusive, EMDR to me would be less intrusive. Cognitive processing therapy would be in the middle, and then prolonged exposure would be more intrusive, because prolonged exposure has you relive the events over and over again. I do have handouts for that as well. I sent you guys handouts for that. You also have, which is really great, and I have research on this, mindfulness, meditation, and relaxation is becoming a huge go-to for PTSD and anxiety and things of that sort, because it helps you to relax. It helps you to learn tools to relax anxiety, to de-escalate anger, and things of that sort. And there's other, you have STARE, and you have other trauma therapies as well, but these are the 4 top trauma therapies. And then you have therapies for children too. Again, today we didn't talk about kids under 6, which might have different presentations, but play therapy, age-appropriate relaxation videos I've used for children. I use now in therapy that I use. They have age-appropriate on YouTube to teach kids how to relax and engage in breathing techniques and stuff like that. They're really cute. So yeah. And, you know, if you guys need services, you know, you have that new star 988 number where you can immediately become engaged in therapy. I would encourage you to get engaged if you need it. Don't try to do it alone. Therapy works. I'm a big advocate of it. I do therapy. I'm in North Carolina, though, Fayetteville. But, you know, I would say get the help, you know, become vulnerable and get the help that's needed to walk you through, because PTSD can be debilitating. It can stop you in your tracks. And, you know, I used to tell people, imagine yourself, take a mental image of yourself running down a street, and the word PTSD has legs and arms and is chasing behind you. And for years and years and years, you've been running, turning, doing maneuvers, and that damn PTSD sign is on your heels, just chasing you all over the place because you can't get away from it. So then the moral of the story is, why are you running? Face it head on. Turn around.
Leslie, you make a good point that I want to ask people to remember, that in the vernacular PTSD, the last word is disorder, and everything we've talked about is to bring order back into your daily activities. With all the complications, with all the connections between anxiety that can progress to different kinds of things that could end up in a PTSD state, or any kind of physical activity that could be the source of a trauma that could then create a clinical scenario, it's all disorder. So that your confidence and care for yourself is about recognizing, I just need to get back into some structure, some framework that brings me back to what I feel good about myself. So yes, it is a struggle. It can be a big struggle, but if we break it down, just like the mindfulness therapy talks about bringing facts into this equation, talk about the order, find the order in your life, and bring your community around you to help you put those pieces together and connect all the parts. Because yes, it is going to be difficult, but it's not insurmountable.
Yeah, and it's scary. It is. It's scary because it does open up wounds. You know, but imagine how many, you know, ruptured relationships have, you know, as a result of, you know, diagnoses or undiagnoses. Imagine, you know, if you can't deal with it, how do your family deal with it? Right. And there are services out there for families too. PTSD for families as well. There's a lot of support groups and information out there for family or loved ones with someone with PTSD.
No,
Yeah.
I was just thinking
Wayne,
about,
did you
like,
want to say anything?
I know that we can give people like coping tools and coping mechanisms, but at the same time, it's like a combined effort, because you still need that talk therapy, somebody to help you process emotions and navigate feelings, and you know, so it all works together. Not one is more than the other. You know, granted, you can have these, you know, you can cope with it as well as you can, but eventually you're going to need some help to kind of help you kind of, you know, be able to really manage those emotions and feelings, you know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Is there any questions before we dive down? Are we going to need to do it part 2? So, Lo, do you want to talk about athletes and PTSD next week?
Yeah, well, and yeah, because it relates to all of us as human beings, but athletes can have the quickest and most traumatic events to create PTSD.
Yeah, let's have a part 2 next week. And then I'll try to get a special guest to come on and talk about PTSD. Maybe I'll have someone come on and talk about a personal experience. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so next week, guys, we're going to have part 2, which would be around elite athletes and PTSD. 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next week, next Monday. Let everybody know this is really an important topic that everyone should be aware of. The idea here is to decrease stigmas and increase awareness to address untreated mental illness. We need to get, you know, I tell everybody, I think that we're in a state of crises right now in our nation, and we need to, you know, try at best to let people know it's safe to get help.
And Wayne, I want you to know, dancers are athletes too.
and specifically to
Okay.
yeah,
And I'm
I think specifically speaking to athletes, you know, I think that's just I think people tend to not humanize athletes because they think they're superhuman and they forget that they're humans and they're people and they deal with a lot of things. And
Yeah.
so when things happen, when athletes get into trouble or something happens, they forget that this person is this athlete is still a person who's dealing with a lot of things, you know, with all kind of pressures and you know, and I think that's gonna be a great topic next week. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I will see you guys next
Yes.
Monday, 7:00 p.m.
Perfect.
Eastern Standard Time.
All right. Bye.
Ugh. See you guys later. Thanks for joining.